Do you have 20 minutes, a quarter yard of fabric, and that itch for crafting that just won't go away? You would be an excellent candidate to try out our new beginner sewing tutorial for a 20-minute scrunchie. You can grab this tutorial for yourself or for a friend if you head on over to coffeecrafters.org. It's an excellent project to do with any new sewer in your life, and if you want to just grab this tutorial and then the perfect fabric for that special someone, this would make an excellent gift if that's what you're looking for too. All right, it's time that I grab myself my hot cup of motivation. Then I gotta roll up my sleeves because we got to get to work. All right, unless otherwise noted, in this tutorial we will be using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. If you prefer a different seam allowance, feel free to remeasure off of the not bold line that's listed in the pattern. Speaking of the pattern, this one is only a couple of really simple shapes, so it doesn't take a whole lot of time to print it out, cut it out, and tape it all together. The only thing that you want to make sure of is that the 1-inch square that's printed on the pattern is actually 1 inch, so you know your printer settings are set okay. The next step, of course, is to iron our fabric. You may notice here that I am using a material over my fabric when I am ironing, and that is called a pressing cloth, and it's a really helpful tool if you're working with any kind of delicate fabric, a fabric that has kind of a lot of piling like a velvet, or if you're working with kind of messy iron-on patches that has some glue that can sometimes stick to the iron, and that ain't cool. That's not what we want. So pressing cloth protects your fabric from your iron, and it protects your iron from any glues or other things you don't want to clean off it later. Okay, now we have to actually cut out the pattern out of our fabric. If you want to make more than one scrunchie, like if you're making a few for Christmas, for example, you're gonna want to grab more than a quarter yard of fabric. Probably at least a half yard. A quarter yard is good to make one scrunchie and bow, or if you only want to make scrunchies without bows, you maybe could get 2 or 3 out of a quarter yard. Okay, you know, to sew a scrunchie, we're gonna have to make it scrunch, and in order to do that, we need some elastic. In this tutorial, I've suggested a 1/4 inch wide elastic, and I've cut it to be 8 inches long. But if you have somewhat thinner hair, I suggest maybe doing a little shorter, like 6 inches long. That would be helpful. Or if you are making this for a child or a toddler, you can just take this whole pattern and cut it in half. So that would need to be a 4-inch long piece of elastic. So actually working with the fabric, we need to take our scrunchie pattern piece, lay it right side up, then fold it onto itself so that right sides together, the long edges line up. Then we're going to pin that long edge together and pick out a section near one of the ends where we have 1 to 2 inches unpinned. I use 2 pins with an X to tell myself that that's where I gotta stop sewing, so that we have a little section that's unsewn later that we can turn the whole piece right side out. After that, we just gotta sew along where we pinned. Pretty simple. Before I get going, I wanted to show that the seam allowances on sewing machines, oh Lord, they are, there we go. This is the 5/8 inch mark. If you would like to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, use that, or a 1/4 inch is marked down here on my machine. It's below the 1. I believe these are centimeters. And that it is reversed over here as well. Like this is still the 5/8 inch mark up there. So if you're left-handed instead of right-handed, maybe you work off of those. I don't know. I always use this side. And we're just using a simple straight stitch. Nothing crazy here. We're doing it fast. But to make this into that kind of donut shape that's a little complicated, we need to do one kind of complicated step. We're going to take the end of the tube that we've just made that has no opening for turning later, and we're going to nest that inside of the tube. So the material should still be wrong side out and kind of wrong side in, because we should have right sides together inside the tube. And we want to line up the seams as best we can and pin it so that we can sew it closed later. To close the short ends, we're gonna have to hand sew. And in this case, I found that just putting a couple fingers inside the tube and spreading it apart gave me the correct tension in order to quickly just run a few running stitches. I just went around once and then I went around again so that it was good, but this isn't a seam that is gonna get a lot of tension on it all the time, so if you just wanna do one round, that's totally fine. Once we're done sewing the short ends closed, we're going to turn our scrunchie right side out through that opening that we left unsewn. We're gonna bring that right side out scrunchie over to our ironing board, and then we're just gonna hand press it down and then use an iron to flatten it out. Now we're ready to put the elastic in our scrunchie. We're just going to thread the elastic through our scrunchie. If you struggle to keep a hold of one end of your elastic, I just pinned one end to my scrunchie and then scrunched the fabric onto the elastic. I didn't really need a safety pin, which is a useful hack lots of sewers know. If you're trying to nest a piece of elastic inside a tube, you just put a little safety pin on the end of the elastic and you are able to grab onto the safety pin through the fabric a lot easier. But in this case, the tube is pretty wide and the elastic isn't that big, so it was pretty easy to just thread it. Once it's through, you're gonna grab both ends of your elastic and you're either just gonna hand tie it together or you can stitch it together like I did. Once your elastic is all tied up, all you gotta do is close your scrunchie. So you can just take your sewing machine and just close that seam if you want. I did a hand sew stitch to just kind of blind stitch the seam closed, and that way the thread is hidden a little bit more. But you don't have to do it that way if you don't want to. Now before we get to the bow, I did want to say hello to anyone who's joining us for the first time. My name's Auntie Sarah and I work here at CoffeeCraft to try to inspire you to create something with your own two hands. Creating videos like today or tutorials like this one are two ways that I try to do that. If you like what we've done so far today, or you're interested in joining us on our crafty journey, if you're looking for tips and tricks or snippets of motivation to keep you motivated through your projects, then you should join our crafty community. All it takes is to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and you're in. I appreciate you watching today's video, and I welcome you wholeheartedly to our crafty community. Now, to get back to that scrunchie, we're gonna need to make a bow to make it fun. This is a little easier than the scrunchie itself, since we don't need to make a weird donut shape. And, you know, of course we don't need elastic. However, we're gonna start just like we did with the scrunchie. We're gonna take our bow pattern piece with right side facing up and we're gonna fold it onto itself. So it will be right sides together with the long ends lining up. Now we're going to pin the short ends and the long ends together, closed, and then right in the middle we're going to unpin so that we have a section to turn this piece right side out later. We're going to sew those edges closed where you start at one end, one of the pointy ends, and you sew towards the middle. Just make sure you stop and leave that section unsewn. Once it's all sewn, all you gotta do is trim up your threads and then turn that bow right side out. I used a long crochet hook this time to turn my bow, but you could use a chopstick or a knitting needle, or you can just do it by hand if you want. But using something to get the little point pushed all the way out through the tube is really helpful. After that, we just gotta hand press and then iron it down so that it's nice and flat and beautiful. And then we have to let that bow take its final form. That just means we have to tie it to the scrunchie. All right, now you can tie this to your scrunchie however you like. If you want it to just be a couple long tails that look super cute, or if you want it to be a picture perfect bow, then I suggest you tie it this way. Loop the bow through the scrunchie so the left hand tail of the bow is over the scrunchie and a little bit shorter than the right hand side. Bring the right hand bow tail over the left hand side, then pull that right hand tail of the bow through the loop and then pull it tight. Now we're going to make a loop out of the left hand tail of that bow, And then we're going to bring the right hand tail of the bow over in front of the loop. Now we're going to pull part of that right hand tail behind that left hand loop and then underneath the right hand tail of the bow. And that should make a couple of little loops that you just gently pull, and make sure you're holding onto the tails that are still there. And as you pull, you're able to adjust the loops and the tails so that it comes out to be exactly how you want it to look. With that, we're done with today's project. I had a lot of fun making this tutorial. I've actually made this scrunchie and bow before. I've taught this to a friend of mine who wanted to learn how to sew, and it was a great way to introduce her to the sewing machine and to different fabrics and how you would, think about how you're going to be making something, right? Because sewing sometimes is not very straightforward on how you got to think about how the pattern pieces come together. Working wrong side out seems a little unnatural to a lot of new sewers. So this is a great beginner tutorial. The scrunchie and the bow that I've made in the past, a few years ago, I made out of cotton, and it lasted really well. It still looks brand new. So here, let me grab it. This is the original scrunchie that I made. You can see I actually made it a little differently, so the tutorial today avoids this kind of ugly seam. I didn't like that much. And then this is the bow. So this I've washed a few times. It washes really well. Another reason you might consider doing this out of cotton instead of out of silk, but it's really up to what you're looking to make and the use case that you're going to use it for. If you want even more details on how to do this project, including a shopping list, tips and tricks, all the steps laid out in a printed format, and even a recipe for a hot cup of motivation that is one of my personal favorites, then please head on over to coffeecrafters.org or follow the links in the description below. Also, if you've gotten this far and you really like this idea, then comment with what fabric you'd like this scrunchie to be made out of. Maybe you want it velvet, maybe you want it silk, maybe you want it cotton, leather. Comment below, I want to know. Anyway, thank you again for watching today's video. I had a great time and I can't wait to see what we can craft together next time. Alrighty, bye-bye.